Welcome to another episode of Insurance Leadership Podcast. I'm Ryan Eaton, your host, and honored to have you listening in with us today. We have Lee Smith, who is a friend of mine. He is a counselor. He's been an associate pastor. He's got so many different roles from advice on leading your family, and that's what our topic is today. We're going to walk through what to do in managing expectations, tension in your family, parenting, a lot of different topics, because at the end of the day, for most of us in the insurance business or in the leadership roles we're in, we want to make sure we're leading our families correctly. So today we brought in an expert, and let's go ahead and get started. Lee, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks, Ron.
Man, I'm so glad to have you here. As we talked about today, we want to go through leading our families, right? As leaders, we got to make sure we're leading our families. To most people, that's the most important thing to them at the end of the day. Absolutely. And you come from a background, you have a consulting business and a counseling business, and you've been an associate pastor, and you've been a mentor to so many people and had mentors throughout your whole life. I really want to take some time with you today to kind of break down family dynamics, tension, expectations, kids, parenting.
All good stuff.
The whole 9 yards, so we can kind of go through this. But before we get started, why don't you tell everyone about your business and kind of a little bit about your background and kind of your family, so they can get a read on you.
Well, hey, since we're talking about families, let's start there. Jenny and I will celebrate 24 years in June this year, which is awesome. Really hard to believe. But we're fired up about that. And then we have 3 kids. We have a 16-year-old son, 13-year-old daughter, and a 10-year-old son as well. And so our 16-year-old just started driving recently, just like you had that too right now, which means we're hovering around Life 360 all the time, watching him and what's going on with him. But man, family life is great and good. When it comes to my career, Ryan, it's been a very kind of diverse background for me.
It has.
Out of college, I spent 10 years in sales and management in both the wireless and pharmaceutical industries. And I remember in 2004, I walked through my door of my home, and I looked at Jenny and I said, hey, I think I know what I want to do the rest of my life. And she said, what? I said, I want to go back to school and get a degree in psychology, and I want to help people in this whole growth process. I love it. And I'll never forget what she said to me. She looked at me and she said, I haven't heard that message yet. I said, all right, well, that's fair. But man, a few weeks later, she came to me and she said, you know what? You're wired for that. I think this is what we need to go do. And so, man, I was very blessed. I went back to school in 05, wrapped up in 07, and then spent about 5 years after that on staff at a church, like you mentioned.
Yep.
But it was in 2011 where I just kind of said, you know what? I think it's time to take the plunge. I think it's time for me to step out on my own and really go and do this thing I feel like I'm wired to do, which is help people grow, period. And so in 2011, did that, started Cornerstone Counseling, and my kind of small mind at the time thought, it'll just be me in a private practice, just a little solo practice on Main Street in Madison here in Mississippi. But, there were other plans going on at that time. And so the practice began to grow, and then therapists started coming and being a part of what we were doing. And today, Cornerstone in 2023 has grown to almost 25 providers now.
That's awesome.
3 locations, with a 4th location opening up later this quarter.
Man.
So it's been a wild ride,
Man, it's been awesome. Well, it's been cool to see it grow, and you've been a mentor to me and a friend and a counselor in so many different areas. Just to be able to call you with different things and studies we've had in small groups together, it's been a blessing to me, and it's awesome to hear. I didn't know about Jenny on the supportiveness on that. That's pretty cool. That's awesome. Well, look, kind of jumping in straight to the families, and one of the questions I want to talk about, you've done a lot of marriage conferences, and I've heard you talk about tension before. And that we have to pay attention to the tension. And I love that comment. I thought that was great, whether it's with our spouse or whether it's with our kids, or maybe it's kids and spouse, or maybe it's just kind of a little bit of an atmosphere in the house that's just tense when you get there. What do you do looking at that if you notice that? What's kind of the next steps there?
Yeah, man, well, first of all, let's just say this. Tension is never fun, right? No, tension's never fun.
Not at all.
But tension is necessary, right? Tension's necessary for growth. And I'll illustrate that real quick. So when we were kids, I remember a couple buddies of mine, we would do this silly game, right? Don't judge us. We would hold out an arm in front of us, and then one of our buddies would grab our wrist and slowly begin to twist our wrist until the pain was so intense we'd just cry, uncle, and then they'd stop. Silly game, right? Silly game. But that boy illustrates, hey, without that tension, without that pain, we would do permanent damage if we just kept twisting the arm, right? And I think a lot of times we have tension in our families, with our marriages, or with our kids. The tendency sometimes is to want to push back, or to just avoid it altogether, medicate it away, or power up over the tension, instead of really embracing it, walk through it with them, And man, see the growth that comes from that. Here's the problem with tension, though. Okay, so Andy Stanley gave that comment one time. That quote. He said, "Pay attention to the tension." But the thing is this: the thing I don't like about tension is that not all tension can be resolved. Some tension has to be managed over time.
Okay.
If you've ever been a caregiver to a loved one, you understand this, because you understand sometimes health issues just don't clear up. Sometimes things just don't change.
Yeah.
And so how do I manage helping this person and yet maintaining my own health? And so I've got to manage that tension over time. It's not going to be easily put into a box, which is what I love.
I know.
I love when tension's there. Let's resolve it.
Knocked out,
put it in the
out of
box.
the way.
Let's move forward.
Yep.
Some can be resolved, and other tension just has to be managed over time.
Well, thinking about tension, one thing that can cause some tension can even be our expectations, right? Like expectation here, reality here, gap in the middle equals disappointment, right?
100%.
And so we've talked about this before, but when sometimes we have unrealistic expectations, right? Like I want a hot, healthy meal ready every night at 5:30 when I walk in, no matter what. Yeah, that's right. But then there's other times that there's expectations that are fair and like, hey, do we address these? Do we bring these up? And you don't want to create more tension. You don't want to do something along those lines. What do you suggest when expectations and reality aren't meeting? What do you hold on to? What do you address? What do you let go? What's your thoughts there?
Man, it's a great question. I think the first thing to realize is that we all have expectations just about everything in life, right?
That's right. That's
we have
right.
expectations about how this podcast is going to go today.
That's true.
Right?
Very true.
We have expectations about everything. And here's the thing: rarely does reality ever match expectations 100%.
No.
And what you said is true. So disappointment is kind of that thing you feel in the gap between those two. And the larger the gap is, the more disappointment that there is, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important to understand two things. When disappointment occurs, when an expectation is not met, it's really important to do one of two things. And you're only going to do one of two things, okay? You're either going to assume the best or you're going to assume the worst. Assuming the worst, let's say for our sons real quick. They're driving.
That's right.
One rule we have right now with our son is, look, you cannot have anybody in your car for the first 3 to 6 months while you're driving, all right? If I see him driving with somebody in the car with him, there's going to be disappointment there.
That's right.
I can assume the worst in that. He doesn't care. He doesn't respect me, all those types of things. Or I can assume the best. He was trying to be a good friend. He made a bad call in that moment. And so you really have a choice here. Am I going to assume the best, or am I going to assume the worst? I always try to encourage myself and other people, look, try to assume the best as long as you can until you can't anymore. What does that mean? It means sometimes your expectation just is not going to be met by that person. And the only thing you can control in that is changing your expectation. Now, that feels like losing.
It does. That's what I was thinking in my head. Yeah.
It feels like losing to us, but man, a real quick example of my marriage where this has played out. So Jenny, love her, but my girl can't be anywhere on time. She just can't.
Yeah.
And where this would really play out would be Sunday mornings on our way to church. And so I'm sitting in the car, kids in tow, Jenny's still in the house, and I feel frustration growing, disappointment's growing, right?
Right.
And for the first several years, it really kind of wrecked our church experience going to church on Sunday mornings, because we were
sitting there in the pew just
angry.
Yeah.
And then I realized, you know what? I can continue to hold her to that expectation and be disappointed, or I can release that expectation. And I think when you honor someone well, you say, you know what? I'd rather have my relationship with you than have my expectation met by you.
Yeah.
And that's a big shift.
That is.
Big shift.
So let me kind of, not to get personal, ask you an uncomfortable question with that, but when was finally that moment that you said, hey, I can continue to let this bother me for years and years and probably till the day we die down the road? Or what was that aha moment for you in that situation?
I think I got tired of being disappointed and frustrated.
Yeah,
I really did. I got tired of walking into church feeling like, oh my gosh, we're 10 minutes late again or 15 minutes late again. And it just, I think you reach a point to where you just got to say, I can either continue to hold on to this, or I can try something different. And trying something different again, it feels like losing, but I'm telling you, I think it's one of the most honoring things you can do. And it's been a game changer for us. We're actually on time for church now.
Isn't that funny?
That's crazy.
That's funny how it works.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, look, thinking of kind of family, staying on that family dynamic in the insurance business. And I know initially probably when I called you and said, look, I want you to be on this insurance leadership podcast, you were like, please don't make me talk about insurance, right? Like I know that was in your head. But I think about it, one of the things that probably a lot of, whether you're on the carrier side and you're traveling or the insurance side, entertaining clients, out to dinners, you're going to miss some things sometimes, right? Whether it's the kids' game, the ballet recital, a date night, or whatever the case may be, it sometimes just happens. What's something that we, as the people missing the special event, how should we try to look at it through their lens when we come back home, right? Like if I've been gone, I'm headed to Arizona for a few weeks for a conference, and I'm gonna be gone for 5 days, which is a long time. Obviously with a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, there's a lot going on every day, and my wife's gonna have to actually pick up more of the load. What's something in that situation that I should be looking at when I come home to make sure I'm the man they all need me to be, and I don't create more tension, or I don't have expectations, or they don't have expectations? How should I be looking at that?
Yeah, I think the first thing, Ryan, make sure you're recognizing the value in what you are doing. While you're away, there's a value to that.
Okay.
The value there is that, you know what, most likely what I am doing in my time away allows my family to be a part of all those things that they're getting to do.
Yeah.
And so recognize the value that brings to your family. Sometimes as men and women, we can feel shame about that. I'm missing this, I'm missing that. And yet there's value in what you're doing. I think it's the best time really to live with technology and stuff too, because it really kind of bridges the gap sometimes in these things that we miss. And so I would say let intentionality be your friend. So it could be that, hey, right before your child gets up to bat, get the FaceTime going if you can, or if it's the last 2 minutes of the game, or their piece and the recital's about to be played, like step out of dinner for those 3 minutes and watch it live with them. If that can't be possible, just about everything can be recorded these days, right?
That's exactly right.
I think it's just about coming back home, sitting down, re-watching those special moments with your child or with your spouse.
That's good.
And then asking them questions. Hey, what did you like about the game? What did you enjoy most about this piece? What's something while I'm home this weekend you want to work on that will prepare you for your next one? So it just kind of, again, bridges the gap, but recognize that value, man, that while you're away, you're blessing your family.
It's so funny you say that. A guy who was a mentor to me owns a cat dealership here. I was asking him, he'd raised some good kids. I knew he traveled a lot, and I asked him that same type question. I said, man, when you were traveling with work? He said, I let them know that each tractor or bulldozer that we sell allows our family to do this. And he put value on it, talks about it when they get home. It's along the same lines. So if you have, and I know so many people have dealt with this, especially probably early in marriage, right? But you're gone, you come back, and it's like, it's your turn to take the kids. Right. I've been doing this for 5 days, and you're kind of coming home more to kind of that tension and expectations that, hey, you better step up because you've been gone, and some of that. Or maybe it's an in-law or a parent or a friend that's putting those expectations out there and creating some of that. How do you recommend staying calm in that situation and not coming back with I've been working so I could pay for all that, and saying something we don't need to, right? And making sure we keep calm, but at the same time, try to understand from their perspective at the same time as well.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think it's really important. Anytime someone confronts you with something, right? Yep. Our first posture is always one of defensiveness.
It is.
We want to explain away what's going on, right? So my challenge would be to that person, hey, listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Listen to try to understand that person. Just because they're frustrated doesn't mean that they're right, but you do owe them the time to sit and understand what they're saying. Hey, tell me more about why you're frustrated, right? Listen, we have blind spots, and sometimes even in work, we can get so bogged down in certain seasons of the year or deadlines or big clients or big events coming up that we really can lose sight of what's important. It happens to all of us. And so sometimes it's really good to listen to the feedback just to go, hey, I need to consider this. And so don't respond in the moment. Just thank the person, say, I can tell you're frustrated. I'm really sorry you're upset. I want to go and consider what you're saying to me and see what I need to do to adjust my life around it, okay?
And they feel like they've been listened to. So
absolutely,
it's
man.
going to ease that on that side of it, man.
That's right.
Great
I
advice.
do think, too, just a little added thing here, I think when we're away on trips and all, there's a certain exhaustion that takes place with that. It's more of a physical exhaustion that takes place. But back home, it's a physical and an emotional because there's no investment like family investment.
That's right.
And so there's a difference in tired when you come back home and your spouse has been there. And it's not that one's better than the other.
That's right.
It's just both need to recognize exhaustion exists in both people.
Oh, so good. So look, when I'm thinking about healthy families, and you've given us some great points on that, But if you had to say maybe, and there's probably 1,000 right answers to this type of question, but if you had to say maybe 2 or 3 things that you see in families that have a positive atmosphere, that have, when you come home, it's a good place to be, the kids want to be with the parents, the spouse can't wait for the husband to get home. It's kind of like, remember when the kids were real young, and I don't know why they don't do this anymore, but you get home and you see them waddling all the way to you, Daddy, you know, it like brought you so much joy, and you're so happy to, you know, they don't run like that anymore when I come in, right? So like, I'm trying to think about it as our kids get older, you know, what are some different things we can do to kind of create that type of atmosphere in our home?
Yeah, man. Listen, I think you're right. There are probably 1,000 answers, and they would all be correct. I think just the things I notice in families that work really, really well. If you're going to lead your family well, you have to start by leading yourself well. This is really, really important. There's this great piece of scripture where Jesus was asked one time, what's the greatest commandment, right? And he says to love your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. We think, oh, that's a perfect answer, right? But he does a little Jesus juke in that moment. He throws him a curveball next. He says, hey, wait, time out. There's a second one that's just like it, and it's love your neighbor as you love yourself. Ryan, I meet people every day that are trying to love their neighbors, they're trying to love their wives, they're trying to love their husbands, they're trying to love their kids, but they're not doing a good job of loving and taking care of themselves, and so they're really giving out of an empty bucket. And at some point, that giving begins to get resentful and creates distance in relationships. And so it's really imperative that you lead yourself well, take care of yourself. And a lot of times as guys and ladies too, they'll say things like, I feel guilty if I pull back and go to the gym or go play a round of golf or do whatever I need to do for me. But I try to help them reframe that. See, that's an investment you're making in yourself that's going to pay dividends off in your family.
To be the best version of yourself.
That's right. That's right. So I think that's one thing. I would say living with boundaries too. Man, have some clear separation between work and home life.
That's good.
My mentor challenged me years ago to find a drop-off point on my drive home. He said, find a place that's about 5 to 7 miles out from your home. Let it be a physical reminder to you that, hey, you're crossing the threshold into family time. And tomorrow when you drive back, you're gonna cross the threshold back again and pick it right back up again. And so having that mental break to say, hey, what I'm about to go do at home is the most important thing I'm gonna do all day. And so having some of those boundaries there are really, really good, I think, too, as well.
Man. So another question off that, it sounds like the same question, but it's a little bit different, you know, and that's phenomenal advice. But if you had to say, you know, Stephen Covey's book, right, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, we've all read it. What would you say that you've seen 7 habits of highly effective families? What would you say? And I'm not asking for 7, but what would you say 1 or 2 those type habits that you see in those relationships?
I think healthy families have a good balance between work and play.
Yeah.
They really do. There is a difference in both of those, and there's value placed on both of those. I would say to be aware of the type of relationships you're building in your home. So there's a task-oriented type of relationship, and there's a relationally oriented relationship. Task-oriented, can I just be honest, it's the easiest thing for us to do. Have you done your homework? Did you clean your room? Have you done this today? Have you done? Those are all task-oriented things that really do not build deep connection.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
No. And the kids even too in that situation, is, hey, did you clean your room? Did you get skimmers? Did you mow the yard? Did you do this? I feel like I've done that before personally, and I felt like I created an environment where it's like, when I see Daddy's going to ask me what I've done, and it's the task, the chore, and it's like I feel like it almost deteriorates your emotional support maybe to them, and
Well, I think they begin to go, hey, I'm only going to be as approved of and liked to the degree that I can knock out all these things, and so my value is based on what I can produce for my parents, right?
That's right.
And so I just think it's about, you got to have some task-oriented conversations at times, but try to make the majority of them relationally oriented.
And pulling that in the insurance side, and it's really probably any business, but we have so many different things, like, hey, make sure this box is checked, make sure this, and that's, they put check boxes on every application and all this stuff. I mean, so we're so used to it, right? And we can bring that home, and I think that's a great point there. So to make sure we're not too task-oriented, I guess I would say. So, you know, we've talked about this before, raising good kids, and that's kind of one of the main things we want to do, and building a legacy there. But the kids are seeing so much stuff different. You and I both have been in many of ditches, and we can teach from those ditches, right? We have bumped our heads many of times and skinned the knees. But when we're looking at today's time, a lot of stuff has changed with technology, right? And you know, we see it all the time where they'll hand an iPad to a kid, to their 3-year-old at the table. table just so they can eat. I'm not going to say that from a judgmental standpoint. Just say, I mean, it starts early, right? And kids now, we were one of those ones that we were judging other parents for years. We were like, we're not going to let our kids have cell phones till they start driving. And that is, why would parents do that? And then that's right. And then in 6th grade, when they had to be picked up from here and taken here, we were trying to figure out where everybody was going. It's like, we need a phone. So it's funny how that kind of all spins. But I guess my question for you here is, those relationships, those different things have changed. Just like that's changed, there's a different way to build relationships with our kids now than there used to be. And you and I even were joking about it when Snapchat came out. We were saying that our initial thought was, oh my gosh, they send these pictures and it's automatically deleted. This could be like the worst thing in the world. And then we saw our kids on it. That's how they started communicating instead of text, right? And it was one of those things that we got on. We did. And I think to this day, I have 3 friends, and it's both of our boys and one more boy, and we're doing it from a communications deal to speak in a manner in which they speak, right? Any other things that you would suggest in kind of that communication side with our kids?
Yeah, I think again, man, some intentionality like that. It's so hard for us to get out of our method of communication and try to adopt their way of communicating. But I think any attempts to do that really help bridge that gap and build deeper connection with them. And so, I would say the other thing too is, again, just back to like when you're with your kids, really just try to be engaged with them. I got a buddy that he always says, hey man, be where your feet are. Yep. If I'm with them, try to really be with them. Try to rid yourself of distractions. It's easier said than done, I get it. But be where you are and just be engaged with them, be empathetic, ask open-ended questions. A little tip on some of this too, a lot of times, kids today, you ask them questions and they'll go like, why are you asking me that? Stop asking me questions. If you can give a kid, a teenager, anybody, something to do and you're doing that with them, sometimes that lessens the wall a little bit and conversations can flow. Crazy, okay? Over Christmas, one of my most favorite memories this Christmas was we put together a Will Ferrell elf puzzle. 1,000-piece puzzle around a table. I love it. And it would be something we'd work on for 2 weeks leading up to Christmas.
I was about to ask, how long did it
about
take?
2 weeks.
About 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks. And so, man, we did. We just worked on it. And what was interesting is that as I would go sit down, here would come a child with hot chocolate and sit down. And then as you're putting puzzle pieces together, you can talk. It's just naturally lowering their defenses down a little bit. But just step into their world, invite them in, be available, and be where your feet are.
Oh, I love it. That for me is playing basketball in the driveway with the boys. It breaks everybody's down. Everyone's laughing by the end of it and everything. So from looking at it from the counseling side, right, and looking at it from what you've heard, maybe directly from you, maybe from other counselors that work with you, what have you heard kids say? My parent's not listening to this. My parent doesn't understand that. They don't understand or get this. What are you hearing from that side that we may have heard someone else say, but of course it doesn't apply to us, right? But what are you hearing from that side of it that we can be cognitive of, aware of?
Yeah. Hey, I can make every parent who's listening to this podcast a promise.
Okay.
Your child has never woken up one day and said, I hope I disappoint them today. This is their worst fear. Is disappointing their parents. And yet a lot of kids feel at times, I'm disappointing them, I'm letting them down. I think as you work with kids and teenagers and you get to know them a little bit, they really struggle with a lot of the same things we do. Yeah. I think most teens would tell you things like, hey man, I want to be me.
Yeah.
I'm not you.
That's right.
I'm not, if they have siblings, I'm not my sibling. I'm unique and I have different interests and desires. And as a parent, it's really hard trying to figure out what those things are and not to shape them and mold them in what we want them to be or think they need to be, but really trying to embrace who they are, their giftings, and trying to speak life into that, right? That's hard for us. It's hard for me.
No, that is.
It's really hard for me.
That's I remember hearing one time Proverbs 22:6, talk about train up a child in the way he should go when he's older, does not depart from it. We've all taken that one way, and if you look back at, I think it's the Hebrew wording, they talk about train them up in their bent, the way they're supposed to go, the way God molded them, and that's a crucial deal. Well, I heard someone say this the other day, and he's not a counselor, but he sees people all the time, and I was like, man, I was thinking for this podcast, trying to get some extra questions for the head and kind of what to do. I was like, what's the biggest thing you hear right now from families? And he kind of put it a little bit different. He said, I hear that I don't know how to get them to listen to me. I don't know how to get them to understand me. And he said, I'm not just hearing this from the parent-kid standpoint, but I'm hearing this from the adult parent, like, hey, you need to let me go to this doctor's appointment with you, or we need to hear this. And I was like, man, I'm not to that season yet where that's really happening, but I know a lot of people are in the thick of it right now. You even brought up kind of an example on that earlier. But what would you say there if you feel like you're having problems getting through to somebody and getting them to maybe start listening to you? Is there something you're doing wrong? Is there something you can do better?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
man.
throwing that out.
Just try to make that connection, right? How
Right,
do you connect
that's
with
it.
them,
How do you
right?
get it?
I would say consider, what is it that allows you to feel connected with your spouse? Think about the ingredients that go into that. Well, I feel loved by them. I feel safe by them. I feel I can trust them.
That's right.
So there's certain ingredients that go along with connection and this kind of relationship you're talking about between parent and child. So more than likely, it's one of two things, Ryan. If you're having a hard time connecting with one of your children, or even your spouse for that matter, it could be that one of those ingredients is missing. And it would be really important just to check in to try to figure out what that is. Maybe they don't feel very safe because they think that you're not going to approve of them or you're not going to like, so they pull back. Remember, they don't want to disappoint you,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
I think the other thing that's really important here too is to remember that I think sometimes we misinterpret communication for our connection as, I want to download my agenda to you. And there's one thing about kids that's always been true. They're keen observers, but poor interpreters. So they know, they can sense something's going on here, and they can almost sense like, hey, I think you got a motive here, which is going to shut a child down. So drop the agenda.
Yeah.
Just make connection your goal, make safety, make love your goal, ask lots of questions, and then time will be your friend with that usually.
That's great. I love that quote on the kids. Yeah, that's good. So I know we're getting close to time here, but I would ask you kind of last, what is one thing that you would suggest for leaders, whether man or woman, husband, wife, whatever the case may be, leading, what would you say we should do from an intentionality standpoint? One thing that you would recommend to not just be able to create our house a good home, and maybe specific on listening, but one thing to kind of pull all that together that we just went over. If you had to encourage everyone to do one thing, what would that one thing be?
So one thing would be this: I want it to be customized to their family. So every spouse needs to go to their spouse and say, hey, what's it been like to be married to me for the last 6 months? And listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Gather that feedback. And then go to your kids and say, hey, what's one thing that dad can do or mom can do over the next year to really grow our relationship? And just gather feedback from them. They're the experts on what needs to happen in your home. And so just listen to understand, don't listen to respond. And if I could add one extra thing to that.
Yeah, please.
Find somebody in your life who's down the road from you. Find somebody that you look at who's not perfect, because there's no such thing as that,
that's
right? There's no such thing as that.
Right.
Find somebody that you can go and emulate. Find somebody you can go learn from, and just share successes, share struggles with, and let them encourage you and challenge you and share their best practices with you too.
Oh, dude. Love it, man. Love you, brother. Appreciate it. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Insurance Leadership Podcast. It was so great having Lee on the show today to be able to talk about leading our families. Before we close out, remember that a good plan today is better than a great plan months from now. Thank you so much.